We build our lives on a foundation of constants. Gravity anchors us. Time flows in one direction. The world around us behaves in predictable, reliable ways. We call this reality. But what if that reality is nothing more than a stable, user-friendly interface? And what happens when that interface glitches? When the code shows through, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, you see the truth that the rules are not as solid as you thought. These are the accounts of those who witnessed a crack in the world. These are 3 true stories of a glitch in the Matrix. Our first story comes from a man whose life runs on a schedule with the precision of a Swiss watch. For 10 years, he has taken the 11:17 p.m. train from Central Station to the suburbs. It's a 40-minute journey of quiet solitude, a buffer between the stress of work and the peace of home. But last Tuesday, the buffer shattered. The train was unusually empty that night. He had a whole carriage to himself, save for one other passenger. A man in a gray overcoat sitting at the far end, his face buried in a newspaper. He took his usual seat, leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, and watched the city lights blur into streaks. He must have dozed off for a second, because when his eyes flickered open, the man was now sitting directly across from him. He jolted upright. He hadn't heard the swoosh of the automatic doors. He hadn't felt the carriage shift with his movement. It was as if the man had simply rendered into existence in that seat. His face was turned towards the window, but he could feel his gaze on him. A cold dread, primal and absolute, coiled in his stomach. This was wrong. He stood up, his movements stiff and clumsy, and hurried out into the inter-carriage corridor. The walk to the next carriage felt longer than it should have, the fluorescent lights above humming an unnerving, discordant frequency. He pulled the handle and stepped into the next car, expecting to see other passengers, normality. He was there, the same man, in the same seat, in the same position. But this time, his face was turned towards him, and it was wrong. It wasn't a face of flesh and blood, but a low-resolution image, pixelated and blurred, like a corrupted JPEG file. His features swam, refusing to resolve into anything human. Slowly, deliberately, he raised a hand and waved. A single robotic gesture. Panic seized him. He stumbled backwards, fumbling for the emergency alarm. He yanked the red handle. But the sound that followed wasn't the sharp, piercing shriek he expected. It was muffled, distorted, as if he were hearing it from the bottom of a deep well. The lights in the carriage flickered violently, and then died, plunging him into absolute blackness and silence for what felt like an eternity. When they snapped back on, the carriage was full. Dozens of people were now sitting around him, chatting on phones, reading books, living their lives. The seat opposite him was occupied by a tired-looking woman staring at her phone. It was as if the last 5 minutes had never happened. He got off at his stop, his legs trembling so badly he could barely stand. The next day, consumed by a need for proof, he called in a favor from a friend who works for the rail network. He needed to see the security footage from that carriage. His friend was confused, but obliged. They scanned through the footage from that night, from the moment he boarded. The time-stamped video showed him getting on, sitting down, and then staring at an empty seat for the entire journey. He watched himself jolt upright, his face a mask of terror. He saw himself flee to the next carriage. But the man in the gray overcoat? He wasn't there. Not on any of the cameras. The system had recorded his terror, but it had failed to record the thing that caused it. Or perhaps it had recorded the truth that for those few minutes, he wasn't interacting with our reality at all. Our next story is about a road that shouldn't exist. It was supposed to be a shortcut. A driver's GPS had rerouted her to avoid a multi-car pileup on the interstate, guiding her onto a rural road she'd never seen before, Timberlane Drive. The road was a stark gray ribbon of asphalt, arrow-straight and bisecting an endless, monotonous sea of pine trees. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to claw at the edges of her headlights. She drove for 20 minutes, and then 30. The landscape refused to change. It was a perfect loop of asphalt and pine. A deep, unsettling feeling of familiarity began to creep over her. And then she saw a landmark. A dilapidated red barn on the right-hand side, its roof caved in, a single dead oak tree leaning against it like a crutch. It was a distinct, mournful sight. She remembers thinking, what a strange place for a barn. She kept driving, her eyes glued to the odometer. Another 10 minutes passed. The déjà vu hit her like a physical blow. There it was again. The same red barn. The same collapsed roof. The same dead tree. In the exact same position. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Twins? A bizarre coincidence? She pressed the accelerator, the engine whining in protest. She had to break the loop. 10 minutes later, her blood ran cold. The barn. Again, it was identical in every single detail, down to the pattern of the broken shingles on the ground. She wasn't on a road. She was on a treadmill. She slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in the middle of the empty road. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her phone. No service. The GPS screen was frozen, displaying Timberlane Drive with a stationary cursor. She was trapped. In a frantic, desperate move, she threw the car into reverse, executing a clumsy three-point turn, and sped back in the direction she came from. She drove for what felt like an hour, her heart pounding in her chest, expecting to see the barn again at any moment. But it never appeared. Eventually, the pines thinned, and the welcoming lights of the interstate emerged. She's tried to find Timberlane Drive on every map since online and off. It doesn't exist. But sometimes on long dark drives, she'll see a glimpse of red in the trees out of the corner of her eye, and she'll know the road is still there, waiting to loop someone else into its endless silent prison. Our final story begins with what seems like a dream come true. The apartment was a steal, a beautiful pre-war building with high ceilings and hardwood floors. The real estate agents said the previous owner had left in a hurry. The only noticeable flaw was a large, persistent damp patch on the living room wall. It was an ugly, brownish stain, and if you squinted, it looked unnervingly like the profile of a person. A nose, a chin, a slumped shoulder. The new owner bought a large bookshelf and pushed it firmly against the wall, blocking the stain from view. Problem solved. The next morning, the bookshelf was shifted a good 6 inches to the left, perfectly revealing the stain once more. He was annoyed, assuming the floor was uneven. He shoved it back. The following morning, it had moved again. Then the sounds started. Not the usual creaks and groans of an old building, but whispers. They were faint, muffled, as if coming from the other side of a thick wall, and they always emanated from that same stained wall. He could never make out full sentences, only fragments. Always the same 2 phrases. It's not safe in here, and he's coming. His patience snapped one night. He'd had a terrible day, and the relentless whispering was the final straw. He marched up to the wall, slammed his fist against the damp patch, and screamed, "Who is there?" The response was instantaneous. It wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, sharp, and perfectly mimicked version of his own voice, laced with pure panic. "Who is there?" He staggered back, his bravado evaporating. That's when he noticed the stain was changing. It was darker, more defined. The profile was no longer just a vague shape. It had depth. It looked less like a stain and more like a window. A window into a version of his living room that was identical but drowned in shadow. And in that darkness, he could see a figure. It stood where he was standing. It moved when he moved. It was watching him. At first, it was just a silhouette. But as the days pass, the details are becoming clearer. He can see the brand of his own t-shirt on it now. He can see the shape of his own glasses. The thing in the wall is learning him. It's refining its copy. He doesn't think this is a ghost. He thinks the damp patch is a bug, a rip in the rendering of space-time, and he's staring at his own echo, a version of him that was trapped in a single moment of absolute terror. And with every passing day, as its reflection becomes more perfect, he can feel it pushing. It's not content to be the echo anymore. It wants to be the source. It wants to trade places and leave him trapped in the static on the wall. A train that defies physics. A road that loops back on itself. An echo that learns to speak. Were these hallucinations? A trick of the mind? Or were they something far more terrifying, brief, fleeting glimpses of the source code underneath our perceived reality? A reminder that the stable world we take for granted is a fragile construct. So the next time your keys aren't where you left them, or you see a face in a crowd that can't possibly be there, ask yourself, was it a mistake? A coincidence? Or did you just experience a glitch, and for a single horrifying moment, the system saw you looking back? Thanks for watching.